are issuing the digital money?
As long as they can keep the Japanese central bank and the European central bank doing the same thing. As long as the Japanese and the Europeans are printing yen and euros, those currencies grow along with the dollar, and so there's no relative change in the exchange values. So the manipulation that Washington is able to achieve is international, and they can support the dollar through their vassal states in Japan and Europe. So how long does that continue? I think it can continue until a large part of the world simply moves away from the dollar payment system and stops using dollars the way the Russians and the Chinese are beginning to do. So that would mean a very large drop in the demand for dollars as its role in financing the international payment system diminishes, and that's when I think they would lose control.
What do you make of China and Russia announcing they're going to launch a new credit rating agency in 2015? Because obviously the other ratings agencies are being used politically to undermine China and Russia.
Yes, I think that's just a response. What China and Russia need more than a new credit rating agency is simply to withdraw from the Western payment system. The two countries have economies that are very complementary, and therefore they can self-finance. And so why they need a rating system, in my opinion, it's reckless for the Russians to rely on Western capital or Western financial markets, because they are a mechanism of Washington's imperialism. And so when Russia relies on Western payment systems, it, in effect, is putting itself under Washington's thumb. And if the Russians did not participate in this system, they would not be facing sanctions, because they would be independent of the system.
Sure, but I mean, that's why the West doesn't respect Russia, is because it's so infiltrated by the same finance systems that we are. And globally, these corporatists, these crony capitalists are above the law, but they're not above the natural laws of man. And there's got to be a breaking point when the military has a 15% approval rating, when the public in Gallup says they don't trust the government at a record level, when we're really in a recession, depression, and they tell us everything's great.
Right.
When reality begins to set in, there's got to be some point where the emperor's new clothes phenomenon becomes a reality.
Yes, I think the grand manipulations could be coming to an end this year. We have not only the manipulation of the economy and people's perception of the economy, but also we have the manipulation of foreign policy and people's perceptions of the outside world. And I think that the government's manipulations have reached the point that they're just now too extreme. And so they may lose their control over people's minds. This grand manipulation will be tested in 2015.
I want to shift gears now. You have a new article out today just titled Charlie Hebdo, the hypocrisy of the EU that censors so much speech. Now acting like they're so free speech, standing up for this magazine, which I stand up for their free speech. But at the same time, hundreds of thousands have been killed in Syria after Western-backed rebels did it. They're connected to this group. What about mourning for all the Syrians or Libyans the West has killed with their al-Qaeda proxy armies?
Right. Well, we don't ever get around to that because that doesn't serve our foreign policy goals or Washington's hegemony over the rest of the world. The Charlie Hebdo does. See, whether or not this was a false flag attack or whether it was a real legitimate terrorist attack, the outcome is the same. 3 goals were achieved. One is France has been pulled back under Washington's thumb. They're back under Washington's foreign policy orbit. You have to remember, just very recently, the French voted with the Palestinians. They took a position different from the American-Israeli position. The British themselves, if memory serves right, abstained. So that this showed two of the most influential European countries moving away from the American position. Also, very recently, the president of France announced that the economic sanctions against Russia must end. So this is another break in the cooperation with Washington's foreign policy. So when you have something like this terrorist shooting in Paris, you cow the French and you bring them back under your thumb. Also, we see the effect of the shooting is to undermine what was a growing European sympathy for the Palestinians. This is not because the Palestinians were involved in shootings, but Muslims are generally Muslims. And so they're tainted by it. And also there was growing European opposition to the new war that Washington is ginning up in the Middle East against the Islamic State. The Europeans have had enough of this. They know it doesn't serve their purpose. Many of them have large Muslim populations, and they understand that these populations are beginning to be radicalized by the incessant bombing and killing of Muslims in the Middle East. And so they were tired of this and were not supporting the American policy, which was making it difficult for the policy to go forward because Washington always needs cover. If it just goes and acts on its own, it faces charges that it's committing war crimes. But if it has accomplices, they can all say, oh, this is necessary to do. See, we all agree. We all agree that this is necessary to do. It's a NATO operation or blah, blah. And so the terrorist, if that's what it was, the Charlie Hebdo affair brings a halt to all of this independent thinking and reorganize behind Washington.
Well, I mean, here's a larger question. How can we as a culture be held hostage by 20 dead people when automobiles kill that many people a day in France, and it's way more than that a day here in the U.S., it's in the hundreds? I mean, since when can the media just take something and make it such a spectacle, and then we're all shaking in fear? Clearly, whether it's staged or real, it's being used to pass draconian censorship in France and the U.S. with a cover of marches for free speech. It is so Kafkaesque. It's so Orwellian. It makes my head spin, and it really makes me fear for the future of our civilization.
Yes, and legitimately so. But keep in mind, the main effect of this is to put Europe back under Washington's control. They're no longer opposing the war in the Middle East. They're no longer flocking to the Palestinians' cause, and they're no longer speaking about independent foreign policies. So it has served a purpose, whether it was a real attack or a false flag attack. And that is the main effect of this. It basically means that the independence of a European foreign policy that the Russian government has been hoping would evolve in order to cool down the conflict and the growing NATO bases on their border and the trouble in the Ukraine, this has now been stopped dead in its tracks because Europe is now back on board with Washington. So this is a very big and serious consequence of the Charlie Hebdo event.
What do you think it signified that Obama's people didn't basically show up at the PR march? A. B. What do you make of the coming prosecution of Petraeus?
Well, I don't know about the prosecution, but it seems clear to me that the reason Obama would not show up at the march in Paris is that if the American president is there, it takes on the look of an American operation. And it makes it too obvious that France is now back in America's pockets. But if he doesn't go, and a lower order person goes, or merely the ambassador goes, then it de-emphasizes in people's minds the association of what happened with American purposes. And therefore, it doesn't make the false flag aspect stand out. It just sort of says, well, why didn't Obama come? Well, who knows? But it leaves it without the mark of American operation. If the president is there, he is the most important person there. And then everybody gets to thinking about America or Washington.
Well, I mean, as you point out in your article that's up on Infowars.com and also on your website that we're linked to there, paulcraigroberts.org, you point out total precision up front. Then there are a bunch of bumbling Benny Hills running around in circles, falling over their shoelaces. After that, it doesn't jive.
Right, it doesn't jive. We'll never know whether it was a false flag attack. It has clearly many characteristics of one. There are many very puzzling aspects to it, but I think the most outstanding suspicious aspect is that these highly professional killers who did such a professional military-style attack, they escape and they leave their ID in the car conveniently for authorities. I mean, really, we heard this about 9/11, right? Remember
yeah, the passports that didn't get burned and then magically got found that day in the rubble?
Yeah, the passport is the only surviving thing in the two Twin Towers. and so here we see that card again used. Now,
the system really thinks we're stupid.
I think, as I said in one of my columns, they make it more and more hard to believe, and when everybody believes it, they sit back and laugh at us.
Well, you were in the highest levels of government. You're in some big think tanks. I know we've had corruption in the power structure forever, but it's never seemed to be this mentally ill. And this, I mean, it's like Gibbs a few years ago saying, I was to lie and say the drone program didn't exist, even though it was public. There's a psychological tactic here, I think, to create learned helplessness or kind of a mass Stockholm syndrome of normalcy bias to where it's just so over the top, we just give in.
It may be, but keep in mind now, Alex, I was in the government prior to the fall of the Soviet Union, and therefore American power was constrained and did not have the same ambitions. But when the Soviet Union collapsed, it let the neoconservatives loose. They said, well, look, there's no longer any constraint on American power. We can do what we want.
They wrote articles in PNAC saying we can take over the world. All we need is false flags. And they publish it.
That's right. So what I'm saying is that my experience in government was a different kind of government. It was a government that was constrained. A government that basically did not want any risk of nuclear war because it understood there's no winner. And therefore, it didn't do the kinds of things that began with the Soviet collapse.
Yeah.
So that is a fundamental difference. There's no comparability between Reagan and then the later regime.
Well, sure. And most of our government, for all its problems, were combat vets. And a lot of them were lawyers. But now it's almost all lawyers. PR hacks, almost none of them have been in combat, and I really think they themselves don't realize how much danger they're putting the world in. I think they're a bunch of, smart, focused, corrupt people, but I just don't think they have the instinctive fear they should of the power they're misusing.
Well, the neoconservatives are in charge, and they want power. They're after it. They want American hegemony over the world. That includes Russia and China. And therefore, when they are greedy for power, they're not bound.
No, I understand. They're power crazy. Let me ask you this in closing.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this in closing. In your gut, or looking at it, how are they doing? The state of the world right now in about 50 seconds. I mean, how are the bad guys doing?
Well, I think with Charlie Hebdo, they've had a huge success. Whether they are responsible for it or not, it has produced for the neoconservatives a huge success. And this means we're going to see more pressure on Russia and thereby on China because the two countries have formed a strategic alliance. And we're going to see a war on the Islamic State. And we're also...
Hold on, finish up on the other side. I want you to finish that thought, and then we'll let you go. Dr. Paul Craig Roberts.
We're on the march. The empire's on the run. Alex